My name is Harrison. I'm coming from 350 and One Sustainable Planet, the two groups that we're working with. And MMT it's not necessarily a new theory. It's a newer name for older economic theories. And it's a coalition, I guess, more just progressive people, economists who are primarily macroeconomists working in this field, typically people who are Keynesian in some way or form. I would call it heterodox, and the only thing I mean by that is it's not mainstream economics, meaning it's not what you would see at, I don't know, in federal government, essentially. There's not really people that are bankers. These are people who do international trading. They are financial traders themselves sometimes. They study international finance. And they basically are looking at how money works, how debt and credit works, and how it actually affects an economy. And one of the biggest things or distinctions we see in economies when it comes to money is that debt has a different characteristic when it comes to governments than it does to households. So as a household, I can't suddenly multiply my income and pay down debt, right? It doesn't work. If I'm in debt, I have to go bankrupt. I have to basically be enslaved in some way to someone. If you're a federal government and you own your own currency, you can always just print more of your currency. That can have problems, right? You can have hyperinflation from something like that. The United States is in a unique position that it has the global currency reserve. Everyone trades in dollars. Everyone wants dollars. When there are recessions, everyone buys dollars because dollars are secure. The United States has a massive military. We can back up all of our claims. So it's not that the United States should spend trillions of dollars, it's that the United States can. We can expend lots and lots of money into the system. So MMT is not stating that you have to do this, it's just stating that you can do these types of things. Yes?
Well, just step back, you said we have a massive military, and how did that relate to us being able to back up our money?
So I'd really like to drill down that money is a social construct. Money is not something that exists absent us. So there are commodity forms of currency, which is gold, cotton, people in older days, I guess. And there are credit forms of currency, which is just that I extend this to you and you agree to pay it back. And our dollars say that if you were to turn it into a bank, it's good for such and such gold, but really they would just give you another dollar in exchange. So the reason I bring up the military is that historically, currencies are stronger in stronger empires and nations. If you can back up the claim of your money, you can have a stronger currency. So a lot of it has to do with expectations and interpretations of what's going on. If everyone suddenly decided they didn't like dollars, we would have a problem because we wouldn't be able to print dollars out. If no one wants to buy our dollars, we can't expend. Greece is in financial problems because they can't have or make more of their currency. They can't make more euros. They could have chosen to pull out of the EU and they could have gone back to the drachma, but what's the problem? No one wants to buy drachmas. No one cares to buy drachmas, so they would have to sell off all of their actual public assets to even make money. Same thing for Scotland and all these other countries that are trying to leave the current unions they're in. It presents issues because of that. So just to go back, the US is unique in that it's at the top of the world economically in terms of the monetary system. Yes.
But that could change? It could become the euro?
It could. I see no reason to expect that
Okay.
as of right now. Typically, if that was to change, it'd be because of larger systemic problems. I don't think it would necessarily be because of something we can prevent consciously. It'd just be because the global dynamics of trade are changing. So if China were to become more and more reliant as the primary creditor in the world, that might be a possibility. I don't expect that to happen in my lifetime. It might.
So who is the primary creditor?
We are. So the Federal Reserve, I don't know if we're all aware of this, but so like during the recession, the ECB and the EU, their main bank required back funds, so they were liquid, because they had purchased a lot of our CDC, a lot of the mortgages that all defaulted on that we had. They had purchased and invested in that. So we had to give them like $15 trillion from the Fed. And the Fed can just print that basically. We just extended it and we handed it to the ECB. So with the IMF and the World Bank, the post-World War II era, the United States kind of took on the responsibility of being in charge of maintaining a stable global financial system. And that's why we've been given this privilege, in a sense. We could have used it, I guess. But yeah, so that's why we're the mayor. We don't have to be the mayor, technically. But history has just made us to be in this position. So the reason we want to spread this and make it more popular for people is because I feel like in terms of economics, there are a lot of misconceptions about what a government can and cannot do. There are a lot of misconceptions, especially around markets, about taxes and government spending being bad for markets, even though I think the historical record shows that these things are what generate markets usually in the first place. Yeah, so it is just trying to beat back conventional wisdom about debt, money, and how we can do all these things that we know as a community we need to do. But as individuals, we just don't have the money to do it, right? Absent pulling our own money together. The state can provide these things, we just need to expose when they're being hypocritical and untrue about the reality of things.
You mentioned right at the start that this is essentially a Keynesian view of things. Is that really that the Chicago School, Friedman and all, say this is not how it works?
I don't
give
think
us
they
a little
will.
bit of information about what they would offer as an alternative position on it if they do.
Yeah. So let's take Alan Greenspan as an example. Does everyone know who Alan Greenspan is? So Alan Greenspan, big objectivist Ayn Rand guy, right? He wrote a lot of papers about why the gold standard was the only key for international stability and everything like that. 1971 comes around and we're off the gold standard. And then later on, Alan Greenspan is saying we can't run out of money and that we're all Keynesians now and this is just the way the system works. It's not that I think Alan Greenspan doesn't believe the things he used to believe. It's just the recognition that we're in a different system now. We are no longer in a commodity currency system. Gold doesn't dictate the extent to which we can expend. We've gone into fiat currency, or just by decree. And that's where it kind of goes down to social expectations. So as long as we have the credibility in this sense, then we can expend it. I think Larry Summers and Ben Bernanke agree with this as well. Where the people like Alan Greenspan might disagree is how that power, that ability, should be utilized in an economic system. So they might want to use it more as we're the lender of last resort when crashes happen, not to prevent the crashes, but just to make it so it doesn't collapse the system when it happens. That's kind of more their attitude, I would guess.
I'd like for you to talk about taxes, like we're constantly being told that in order to fund anything like Medicare for all, that we would have to raise taxes, which we all know isn't going to happen. So I want you to talk about the fact that you don't have to raise taxes, but that is misinformation.
Yeah, so I'll qualify it by starting by saying that I do think that raising taxes is good for other reasons, like income inequality and such. But in terms of just getting the finances to fund the projects we need, the federal government as a system doesn't need to tax to get those funds. Washington State, if they wanted to do single payer, would have to tax people to get those funds. The reason the Fed doesn't need to do this is because the way the Treasury and the Federal Reserve are set up, they basically buy back and forth T-bills and other assets on the open market. And the Fed, in this way, through quantitative easing like they've been doing, can slowly pump funds into the economy. And that's kind of the roundabout way of doing it. They don't technically have to do it that way. That's just the way the system's been set up. We could just expend directly as the federal government into the economy. And that's why we wouldn't need to tax to get that money in the first place. And we do this when it comes to the military. Whenever we need to expend just to buy things, we do it. And in a way, we use this to pump up our economy. So a lot of our economy is stimulated through military spending, through deficit spending. So this is money that wasn't taxed or borrowed necessarily, that's spent on military industrial industries that then provide jobs and money. So that's, it keeps the economy going, and that's why I would say it was Keynesian. But you don't need to tax it to do it. In the New Deal, when we were under the gold standard, FDR had to actually confiscate gold from American citizens, and then they made it so you could only transfer or convert the dollar, that $35 for gold, but they didn't allow anyone to do it. So you actually couldn't do it even though you technically could, and the system was based on the faith that no one would until 1970 when other nations started to act like they wanted to, so that collapsed it. So since we're in a more free-floating system, we don't need to worry about those limits. Taxes are an issue. We might want to push them politically, it might make more sense to still have them be a part of our argument. But if tax is a big stopping point for someone, we can get around it and make it clear to them that it's not that we're coming to take their money to fund these programs.
Have you all put out something that actually would be enough in layman's language?
Yeah, so on the, can I see the legal thing? So on this sheet, under articles, introductory, the nation has, and that's near the top of the page, the rock star appeal of modern monetary theory. And it doesn't go too much into the theory, it's just kind of giving you an idea of who the economists are and what they've been talking about and what they're trying to move towards. As for videos, if you go down to videos introductory, I think both of these videos are very good in getting you familiar with it. The one up top, the basics of modern money, is 6 minutes. It's graphics and some guy talking. He just explains step by step, really basic concepts that are going to be probably intuitively wrong in your mind, just because of what we've all been taught about money throughout our life. But if you can go ahead and listen to that and then switch over to one of the longer videos, like the one about with any of the ones with Stephanie Kelton. So the one with Tom Hartman, I don't think I've watched that one. But the Angry Birds one with Stephanie Kelton is really good. It's a little longer, it's about an hour. But she uses the game Angry Birds to kind of help describe how this works. And for her, we've all heard probably the term deficit hawk, people who don't want to spend more money. She's trying to counter with deficit owls or something like that, which is pretty interesting. If you want to get more complicated though, once you've gone past those ones, the video at the very bottom, Intellectual Origins and Policy Implications by Randall Wray. He's an economics professor, and he goes into just the history of these ideas. So this is him going back further into the 30s with Keynes and others explaining why we think the system works this way. But I would begin with the other videos first.
And then that's to educate me, but let's say, are there some talking points out there once, you're semi-educated that you could actually make an argument to other people? Do you all have some talking points or anything like that?
Okay, so this will be rough out of my head, so sorry if it's kind of scattered, but I think some of the main concepts in terms of talking points that you want to address are debt. So how does debt work? What is money, essentially? And how the actual monetary system we have right now works. So not just debt and money in the abstract, but what really happens. So in terms of debt, I would just stress that whenever someone is in debt, it means someone has an asset, right? Whenever you have a loan from the bank now has an asset. So there is no such thing as lots of people being in debt in a society where there is also no wealth. Because if there's no wealth, then no one can be in debt, right? How would you get the money? So it's basically off that principle, you can switch over the money to help explain that if the government is the originator of money, so where do your dollars even come from, right? How do you pay taxes in dollars if you don't have dollars to begin with? The government has to spend dollars into the system for them to even exist, okay? They have to go into debt by spending the dollars of the system. That doesn't mean that the government is now out of money. It just means they made assets in the economy that someone else now has. And the economy is cyclical, it's moving, it's more of a system, it's not like an engine or something like that. That debt production, the federal deficits, are then necessary for the economy to even have savings, for us to have growing incomes. It doesn't mean the government always needs to be in a deficit. It just means that deficits per se are not bad.
Do you think there's some target where the debt should be some percentage of the entire economy?
I don't know. I know some people would argue that. I haven't heard that from economists who are primarily in MMT. Debt to GDP growth ratios. Well, so that's something economists want to look for. If private debt is skyrocketing in comparison to GDP, that's usually a bad sign. So there are some measurable differences, but let's make a distinction here. Skyrocketing.
How about federal debt or deficit
Yeah.
compared to the entire monetary supply?
So federal deficits are not as big of an issue. If federal deficits are skyrocketing, what it means is that private savings and corporate savings are skyrocketing, just by identity in terms of how it works. If private debt is skyrocketing, that would imply that someone else, either the government or maybe people outside of the country, are having more money while private citizens are in debt. And that's a bigger problem, because then you're going to start to slow down the economy. It's not a problem with the federal government because, like I already said, the federal government can't run out of money. so it's never running out of fuel. Does that make sense?
But like you're saying, is that if there's too much out there, you're gonna cause inflation
Mhm.
problems and,
Yes.
Which we
So,
don't currently have, so.
so inflation right now is historically low, and we're kind of in a stagnated economy that's not really growing. That's partly to do, I think, because of all the debt in our economy that's private debt. The federal government could theoretically pay down a lot of that private debt. We bought out the banks and we bought out Chevy when they crashed. We didn't do it with home mortgages. We probably could have done it with home mortgages. And that would have been better for the economy. So yeah, you can pump money into the system. Typically, you would stop once you reach something like full employment. Once you've gotten to a point where the money you're putting in is no longer actually going into a productive asset, then it's just gonna start to bid up prices because they aren't actually making more goods. So you would wanna make sure everything you spend is an actual asset. So a lot of the stuff we see, so like price stock bubbles, what are those? That's when people speculate on the price of something to get it up and it crashes. It's not because any actual new assets were made. So you could technically, as the federal government, do that by printing more money and it would be bad. Like it really depends where you're putting the money and how it's working. So why military spending doesn't inflate is because you're actually creating assets that then go to get destroyed, you know? But it's actually going somewhere.
And the interesting part of the debate, most of the military spending in the last couple of wars has been off books. It hasn't even showed up in the accounting that we're having available to us. But military spending is a non-performing asset, whereas if that money were being spent on railroads or freeways or so on, that increased productivity overall, that's better use of money.
Yeah, so we want appreciating assets. So even like paying for students' educations, that's an appreciating asset.
Right.
They're gonna become more productive citizens down the road and so forth, and yeah.
so that's why like social programs really are productive assets.
Yes.
Because you're getting people out and you're getting them into the workforce and.
Yeah, we're expanding people's capabilities.
I wanted to come around to basically to this point. I was looking at Brad DeLong's column this morning, and he's pointing out that we have this hopelessly low inflation rate, signified by the Fed is no longer raising interest rates like they had said they were going to. And then looking back at the stimulus package that Obama started out with and then tried to extend, the Republicans wouldn't let him extend it, which, as best I could understand, was because it was really successful in producing jobs and generally pulling us out of the recession. They said, no, you can't do that anymore. And we have been in that state now for the entirety of the Obama years. But Trump is saying he wants to do a stimulus package, but he's talking about it in a very different way that appears to me to not be producing public assets through the spending. I
Yes.
wondered if you could talk any about that.
Yeah, so from what I understand about Trump's infrastructure bill specifically, or what they're trying to do, economists that might be interesting to look into is Leo Panich and Michael Hudson specifically. But Hudson's view is that, so what they're basically going to do is they're going to try to stimulate the economy, right? But they're going to direct it through contracts. So they're going to give it to private contractors to build these things.
And to own them.
Yeah, and then
Yes.
to own the roads themselves. So the toll roads would then be going to private companies. What you're basically doing is taking the infrastructure and then extorting people. And it's just going to cause prices to go up because you have to pay more just to do basic travel. That would be the downside of Trump's plan. So in theory, it might stimulate the economy. It probably wouldn't help everyone.
Well, and the other thing I've been reading too is he also wants to pull some of this over where the states have the responsibility. So if you're dealing with states, then in money, it's a whole different situation.
Yeah, so you can force it down and make it constrained
And
even
that
more.
seems, yeah, that's at least what I'm reading right now.
Yeah, no. Yeah, so that is a big issue. That could severely increase just transportation costs for people every day.
Harrison, I don't know how much longer we have, do you know?
Where are we going to?
We
But
have
I
till
also-
we have till 4:50 or 4:45.
Yeah, we still got
Okay,
it.
yeah, like an hour.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, we've got a lot of time.
I just wanted to announce also, this is Randy Mandel, and Randy also knows a great deal about this, and so I don't know how you figured that out, but, you know, I do want to make sure that you know that Randy
Do you want
is
to-
also here to talk.
Go for it. Sorry, put you on the spot.
I would explain it a little bit different though.
Yeah, no, go for it.
So the way I would look at modern money is the following. When you've got an economy with a lot of unemployed or underemployed people, if you generate the money to put them to work to make productive assets, goods or services, you're increasing the money supply, but you're also increasing goods and services, so it's completely non-inflationary. So you actually can push this until there's full employment without a problem. So for example, if we wanted to print money to pay for healthcare, and Vandana's a physician, so we give her the money to take care of patients. She then has more money, so she goes and buys things. And there isn't necessarily enough things to buy, so they have to hire people who are unemployed and bring factories back online to make those extra goods and services to meet that demand. So what you're going to find is you can have universal health care. You're not going to increase the debt. You're not going to lead to inflation. The downside is you're going to decrease unemployment and you're going to decrease poverty, which is something I guess we'll just have to live with. So as long as you have unemployed or underemployed people, if you're hiring people to teach, provide healthcare, build green economy, build green housing, or deal with climate change, until you run out of unemployed or underemployed people, the increased money is balanced by the increase in goods and services. So you could simultaneously bring everybody together, eliminate unemployment, provide healthcare, pensions, and education, and deal with the green economy. And the system goes until you run out of unemployed people or underutilized resources. At which point, if you want to continue the game, you notice that a lot of people are employed and resources are being employed for wasteful things. For example, military spending. And you can simply redirect that back. So basically you can do this until you have got everybody doing something useful. And then your economy is maxed out at that point. At that point, if you continue to spend money, it becomes inflationary. But we are so far from there. We could literally wipe out unemployment, underemployment, pull everybody back to working together, build green economy to the degree that we can, as well as fixing these problems. So that's the first thing MMT can do. It can do three things, in my opinion, but that's the first of one. It also kills our democracy, right? Because instead of us fighting for one another, we can actually pull together. And to fix the healthcare system is to also reduce unemployment, and so on and so forth. So that's the first thing it does. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. The second thing is automation's about to really kick in. Mm-hmm. And there just isn't going to be jobs for people. And I think the only option is you're going to need public investment in the type of jobs that are not going to compete with automation, hiring people to do things like care for one another, mm-hmm. Care for the environment. And the way you're going to fund that is going to be through MMT. Hmm. And the third thing that MMT does is, and it goes back to the private debt. And by the way, in terms of the public debt, I think the target is you don't worry about debt until you have limited unemployment. So that's the target. You don't worry about it. So your target is get rid of unemployment. And that's where you stop. So that's the main, I don't know what the number is, but that's the number you're looking at. If you go back to Obama in the bailout, which is 2008, we spent about $29 trillion to bail out the banks, counting direct gifts and zero-interest loans it took to go to other countries and steal from them. What could have been done is the following things. We could have said, if we're going to bail you out, we got some conditions, and one of which is we want to break up the banks, we want to regulate the banks, we want you to write off the student loan debts, the credit card debts, the municipality debts. That's a big deal. And we want the mortgages written down to their normal value. You could have said that. And as far as municipality debts, understand Flint grows out of that. You may know that in California a couple of years ago, there was these big forest fires due to climate change, and they had austerity in their state budgets. And what they did, they used prisoners to fight those fires. And they paid them either $2 an hour or $2 a day. These are prisoners to fight the fires. And then when the fire season was over, California said, our prisons are overcrowded. There's some really dangerous people here, and these kids were not, they weren't hardened criminals. Maybe they smoked marijuana, whatever they did. And we're going to send them back to these overcrowded prisons where they're not safe. Not safe in an overcrowded prison is not a good thing. No. We just get them the hell out of here, early release. And the state said, no, don't do that, because we'll need them for next summer to fight fires.
Okay.
Now, what Obama could have done is simply given a grant to California to hire firefighters, and let these kids out. They got let out anyway. And what would happen is firefighters, I hire Harrison to fight the fires, he has more money, he goes to spend things, and lo and behold, not quite enough to buy, but you don't have a job. Works out just fine, right? You have to go back to work to make, so it would have been fine to do it that way. So these municipality debts, that they never had to be there, and they should have been written down at the time of the bailout. Like Flint never would have happened if they'd done this. And there's never a shortage of money to fix Flint. So what happened basically was the bank said, well, if you don't bail us out, we won't provide fresh credit and your economy's going to crash. Understand a couple things. The government can create money, all we need. And when the banks create the money, they loan you the money and you pay it back with interest. When the government creates the money, it circulates as money. If there's too much of it, they can tax it back later. But they don't have, so you can go to school on a student loan and the bank's loaning the money and pay it back with high interest rates. Or the government can simply monetize it and the money just flows out there. And as long as you're building the economy, that's not going to be a problem. So there was never a problem with we would run out of money. In fact, you'd be much better off with the government providing the money. Now, some of the bank money was cross-linked into some people's pensions and also could have collapsed. But the government could simply replace the money. Like you've done the work, you have the right to the pension, the resources are there, you just lost your ticket to get those resources. Replace it. So you could use modern money to basically tell the banks, you know what, you blow up and your big threat is worthless. We can simply go back to a much, so about 75% of working people pre-crash were spending their money off on the consequences of what the private banks had done. Unnecessary mortgages, unnecessary student loans, unnecessary credit cards, states are out of services, and taxes the financial sector had basically blackmailed off their books onto your books. We could have written all that off and been just fine. We had the power, but no one realized we had that power. So that's the
I have an aside from this line of talk. There's a movement to have public banks,
Yes.
such as the state of Washington may.
Yeah,
Can you just include that?
it's different.
Okay.
So banks still loan money. The government, monetary spending does not have to get paid back. And telling the banks that, I'm not against a state bank, it just has, it has some good things, but it's not these things are beyond that. But I'm not opposed to it.
Okay.
But anyway,
I'm sorry.
no, that was, I had one last point I was gonna make, and I'm sorry, and you asked a great question. We were talking about the 2008 bailouts and what could have been and should have been and can still happen. But it's going to be critically important at some point to get that private debt off the books. And it's fraudulent loaning. I mean, when a bank makes a real loan, if I loan you money and you're going to build a solar panel company and hire people to make solar panels, something that's a productive loan. But when the banks give you higher, drive up your mortgages higher, or they loan money to corporations to buy back their own stock, to make money for the CEOs, then that loan has to get paid back, and nothing was created to pay it back, so they come out of pensions, and they come out of marketing and developing. So they have loaded the country down with an enormous amount of debt that is simply they're siphoning off the wealth of our country, which is why we're not dealing with climate change, et cetera. And now that we're loaned out, they're doing this to the rest of the world, and that's where a lot of the conflict is coming. The bottom line is we have the tools to write it off. We have to simply understand that if the bank makes a loan that has no, when the bank makes a loan, they don't have a plan for how you can pay it back with a normal business activity. In upstate New York, it always used to be called fraudulent conveyance. So if, what the English interest is, they loan money to the farmer, and they say, look, we know what we're doing, we know a lot about math, and you've got a farm that's worth $100,000. I'm only $5,000, and you're going to put your farm up as collateral. And they'll ask for the loan back before the harvest, and you have no way to pay it back, and they say, well, guess I get your farm now. But that's what they're doing with student loans and with your housing. And what the state of New York says, if you make a loan without your expertise that this is a loan that's going to lead to increasing growth in asset that justifies paying it back, and it's your responsibility to know that. Like if I'm a doctor, a surgeon, and I say you need an operation, you don't, and then I mangle it and you're harmed, I can't say you owe me your house and your family's livelihood, you get to sue me. So if the bank made a loan, they didn't know you couldn't pay it back because it wanted to make you pay too much for a mortgage, or it wanted to steal your kid's future, or wanted the corporation to have to pay out of its pension funds, you basically tell them to, I won't use that word, but you tell them to go amuse themselves, and the loan is canceled. So if we understand that these are illegitimate debts that shouldn't be paid, when the banks say, well then screw you, we won't give you no money, we've got a much better way to finance what we need. And those are the two tools, I think, to really pay off getting back to a healthy economy. And then all that can be redirected towards green economy.
And so I want people to be able to ask questions, and let's go back and forth so that, you
I'll just make really a quick comment on the public banking. I think like all these issues here, this presents a good crisis to use to reform our financial system. We can, to be more radical, we could nationalize our financial system. This is a public utility. Why this is for profit and predatory is beyond me. And it makes it unstable. But public banks are a good way to do that. The public banks could lend money and create money, and the interest would be paid back to the state. So it could, in theory, be paid back to the people. I mean, there might be other complications there. Or the Fed can just disperse the money themselves as well. But it does present a very good opportunity to reform how we do finance in this country. But yeah, so do you have any questions then?
Yeah, so let's go to questions, so that you
Yeah, I'm listening to a radio show about where an economist was being interviewed. I think it was Tom Hartman's show just this week, where he said the basis of our economy was that money was created by the banks when they loaned money. So is that what you're saying? That's how it is now, but we'd rather have it be the government creating the money without creating this interest to the banks?
We do a lot of weird back and forth right now. So rather than have the Fed and the Treasury coordinate to create more money, what we'll usually do is we'll sell T-bills on the open market, and banks and other financial institutions will buy that. So in a way, that is a form of borrowing, because then we're committing to pay interest to the banks, and it provides funds for the Treasury in that way. So yes, we do it that way. We don't have to do it that way, and it's not how we fund everything in the country at the moment. But
When the banks loan you money, they create money de novo. That money didn't exist. They create it out of thin air. So and they charge you interest from it. They're not loaning their money or
Right.
their deposit's money. They're just loaning the money.
That's what he said.
But the government can spend it directly. In fact, that's what they can do. So they could actually monetize Social Security, or they could simply tell Congress to. I mean, Congress votes and they appropriate the funds. They do it electronically. So very little money these days is paper money or coins. It's mostly electronic. So they just put it into accounts. In fact, famous story, and it's an important story. The bailout was $29 trillion. Notice they didn't bail out the real economy. They didn't bail out the students. They didn't bail out the environment. They bailed out the banks, who then kept these huge debts on their books at the time of their bailout. So you're still having the economy bled out because you're paying far more money. People like Obama, but be careful, this is what he did. And he did it in cold blood, and he did it with bank support. But people need to remember an important moment. It was Bernanke, I think. Bernanke was on 60 Minutes. And Scott Pelton said, you're spending a lot of money on the bailout. Is that taxpayers' money? And remember, the reason we had to bail them out is if we didn't bail them out, they cut off the money supply. That's not true, but that was the line, okay? So Bernanke says, no, it's not taxpayers' money. The big banks have accounts at the Fed, just like you have a bank at the credit union, and we use the computer to just mark up the size of their account. We created eventually $29 trillion out of thin air to put into bank accounts because we had to, or else we have no way to get new money in the future. Let that sink in. None of that had to happen. So that's the same money they created out of thin air to save the banks. And remember, at the same time they did that, they left your mortgage where it was, they left the student loans where it was, they left Flint where it was, they left the school systems, I mean, they left all that in place. And the reason was if we didn't give in to the banks, we'd run out of the money that we created $29 trillion out of thin air.
Are there any elected officials who understand this?
A lot of them do. Stephanie Kelton so MMT, and this is important. I talked about this when I was an octopi, and I was treated like a total crazy person because it sounds pretty out there. Stephanie Kelton's one of the top people, and she's the one who did the Angry Birds. Stephanie Kelton was the top economic advisor to Bernie Sanders. That's why there was a big difference between Bernie and other people. Bernie had Michael Hudson. He had Bill Black, who was the big break up the banks. I mean, the people who care about these issues, about breaking the power of the banks and putting the money back into a real economy, the best of the best were Bernie's team, including Stephanie Kelton. And whereas his opponent was a Goldman Sachs person, if I believe that way. So was Obama. But in any event, so Stephanie Kelton has spoken with a number of legislators, Democrats and Republicans, and she said, and she says it in Angry Birds, there's that moment where you can see it in their eyes where they're like, oh, that's how this works, but I can't say that in public. Here's a real important point. Bernie Sanders talked about free college education, like, well, how are you going to pay for it? And Krugman kind of stuck a knife in his back. Like, we have no way to, I mean, the only harm to monetizing education would have been, and I know no one here is going to be okay with this, but it would have been a decrease in the unemployment rate. And I know what you're thinking, but we could have handled that. It was completely doable. But he never said that. He said we should do it by taxing transaction taxes. The problem is, until the public knows what this is about, he'd look like a crazy person. He'd say, we can just create the money, and then Fox News can spin that, and you know how that would look. So if we know this and get the word out, then there's a space for people like Bernie to talk about this. And if he'd said to the average kid, look, we can send you to college for free, and you don't have to wind up with this massive debt, and we can, in fact, write off these other debts, and there's a way to replace that money, and in fact, there's a way to fix the green economy, we don't have to die. And there's an easy way to do it, and all it's going to do is get rid of unemployment, and maybe some less military spending. I don't think people are going to get that upset about it. So the more we can understand this and spread the word, I think the more that space exists. But yes, we've talked with our congressman, and I know that Dr. Kelton has talked with quite a few of them, and they get it. It's a little bit like gay marriage. Okay? When we, the people, say we're good with it, suddenly our congressmen are brave and are willing to take that stand. But until we say we're okay with it, they're not quite as brave about that. But this is a big one. I mean, we can literally go extinct if we don't deal with climate change. And we can fix that problem. And the beauty of it is, in fixing that problem, we could also fix pensions, health care, education, unemployment, underemployment, and give people the understanding we can all work together for a common good once again and kind of restore democracy. And have the issue that allow us to tell the progressive Democrats from the Wall Street Democrats. But other than that, this is an unimportant issue, just to say this. But that is why it's, I think, a big deal.
Aside from the theory itself, there's also the political reality. And obviously, there are institutions or individuals that would want to put out a message to contradict what we're hearing. Who are the most effective voices in the opposition? Who are the people who are able to shape that argument?
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess I'll use myself as an example. I got into economics because of Ron Paul. Like, I grew up in a very conservative family, and Ron Paul was my way out, in a way. Ron Paul's like the big gold bug guy, right? So what are the circles around him? So you have like the Mises Institute, the Cato Institute, American Enterprise Institute, Hoover Institute, I'm sure maybe even ALEC nowadays and stuff like that. So a lot of these think tanks that are just kind of out there randomly and have lots of published reports that all sound the same for some reason that are pumped out, you know? It's that they can use as a way to say, hey, look, here are our policies and here are these economists at universities that agree with us. And here's their policy papers that show us this. Even all the IMF research, Bank of England research, Fed research contradicts everything they say. I mean, you're going to have to fight these think tanks that are generally conservative or libertarian and funded by wealthy benefactors, essentially. And I think the best way to do that is to kind of expose that in a way. But I also think, maybe this is where I disagree just a little bit with Randy, I do think we need to keep the tax rhetoric in our politics, because I do think class divisions are a big way to push this type of stuff out there. I don't think the average person who makes less than $20,000 a year is upset that we're going to tax Wall Street financiers to pay for healthcare. It's just the guys who are on the TV who get upset about it, right? So yeah, I don't know how to deal with that politically necessarily, but I think we have to fight them both in their own rhetoric and at the same time just kind of expose how they're being hypocritical about stuff.
So I don't have to disagree with you. I think the world is so it's going to be one of those kind of things. I think virtually nobody knows MMT at this point, so there isn't really, I mean, he's right, they have their viewpoint, but until we start to talk about this, we don't get the pushback. But where the pushback is going to come is the following, and to be honest, the DNC is tight with Wall Street. Wow. And they pretty much were very, very upset with Bernie Sanders even coming clear to this issue. So I think that's where that big issue is. I mean, that's where the problem is going to be. But the more we know about it, the less. But until we know about it, we don't know what it's going to be. But it'll be coming through Wall Street and through the DNC. I agree with you that taxes are important. But here's what I would say: we don't need taxes to fund social programs. We agree on that. We need a carbon tax. We need to tax bad things like too much wealth, campaign contributions. We need to tax we need to tax all the bad things. But here's a depressing thought. Working people are barely getting by. If we have full employment, sometimes we have to tax them to avoid inflation. But we are nowhere near full employment. So yes, we need to tax wealthy people and transactions and carbon especially. But why are we taxing working people? And the answer is the following. when you tax working people, you lower their standard of living, they have less money to spend. That leads to higher unemployment and higher underemployment, because when they spend less, that somebody's job is lost. And actually, one of the economists we work with nationally made the point that they're actually taxing people because they're trying to keep the unemployment and underemployment rate high. And the reason for that is it keeps wages down, and Wall Street with their payday loans and the reverse mortgages and all this other garbage they're doing, the more you live paycheck to paycheck, the more they can prey on you. So there's no reason to tax working people. There's a huge reason to tax a bunch of other people, so I don't know if we're really disagreeing, but it sounds good.
Yeah, I'm just saying, keep it in the rhetoric, but yeah.
But that's that. And then, before we go, there's one last thing though, is we need to talk about this balanced budget amendment thing coming up, because that's a huge deal.
Yeah. Let's get, you were next, I think, and then you.
What you're not directly saying in this is the very wealthy are going to come up on the short end of the stick.
Well, I mean, if you
And I can't quite see why that would be the case. I mean, the whole thing of we got to keep wages down because it lets them prey on people more. You could just as easily say if people have more money, they're going to buy more stuff, the rich are going to get even more rich. And we're all going to be better off for it. Where's the...
Yeah.
Because it seems the opposition to this, what you were indicating, is that Wall Street's going to lose big if we implement this stuff. You know, the Koch brothers are going to lose big, and on and on.
So I guess the only reason I made the comment about how we need to keep the tax rhetoric in there is, so we want to be careful we're not having our cake and eating it too, right? So like, we could theoretically just not tax the rich and do all these programs, right? But what I want to make clear is like, we do live on a finite planet. And the rich at their current consumption rates and the current, just what they take in is far too much. And if we continue to just give them the money as they are right now, we're just continuing those consumption patterns and you're continuing those inequalities, which are going to lead to worker insecurity and unemployment insecurities and stuff like that. So we're going to be trying to solve the problem without actually doing everything we need to do to fix it. So I don't think that we could massively stimulate the economy and then fix all these things, but then still have the rich be really rich.
So you are working towards income equality.
I think it would
Some greater level of
necessarily
now
have to
and
come about as we go along, just because of the political factors involved. But even just there are economic limits there, I think that you're going to hit eventually.
Well, wouldn't you hit an issue where if you keep getting so rich, there's nothing else to consume? I mean, and so you're just...
Well, in terms of just relative purchasing power, if the rich continue to have an exorbitantly larger amount of money, it does devalue how much you as a working person can buy with the money you're getting. So it could just it could be really inflationary if you don't stop their consumption, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, remember, once you've had full employment, you run out, if you want to continue to do social programs, you have to cut the funding from somewhere else, which means from programs that go to the rich. So I mean, we're not disagreeing with that either.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the elephant seems to be that I don't see how you're going to achieve full employment if the currency keeps going offshore for the work. And I realize it's offset with longshoremen, probably not on the canned ships because that's mostly foreign crews, but certainly with longshoremen and occasional truck drivers to drive to Walmart distribution. But the filthy rich are offshoring their money as they get it to keep from paying taxes. The corporations are offshoring their money to foreign production and offshoring their money to avoid taxes. So it doesn't seem that you can reach an equilibrium.
Yeah, so I mean, if we were to rely on those institutions to employ people, then yes. I think we need to realize that, so in a way, MMT, especially in addressing climate change and full employment, is a step away from free enterprise. So we're advocating for the state to become involved. And that could be, I mean, these are a big debate. I don't know where I really fall on this. This could be full employment policies. This could be universal basic income. Just things like that, different policy tools that are not private and they're not corporate. And they would have to be implemented by the federal government. And maybe they could be done in cooperation with the state governments as well. There are other things you can do that Sweden and France does, which is just lower what the work week is to 35 or something like that, and increase how much people are paid. So employers just hire more people, but for less hours. And I guess, I mean, especially with automation, we could potentially move in a direction where not everyone has to work. So what we mean by full employment can be tricky as well.
Right.
And if you'd like to make a difference locally, we're trying to get an income tax in the city of Shoreline.
Yeah. So until we can do this, stuff like that is what's important in the short run.
It's where
Very
the
much
rubber
so.
meets the road, right here.
Mhm.
The other thing with income inequality, or wealth inequality, which is important, we're in debt, right? Mortgages, credit cards, student loans, municipalities. Somebody is owed that debt, and that's the super wealthy. And they're super wealthy because they're the owners of this massive debt. We recognize the illegitimacy of that debt and write it down. In fact, write it off. You no longer have a high mortgage, you no longer have a credit card debt. We get rid of those debts. The super rich cease to become super rich because the mirror image of our overwhelming debt is their overwhelming economic financial wealth, which is a reason why they probably aren't going to like this very much. But if you understand that we can get, I mean, why are they super wealthy? It's financial claims against us. We write those off, they're not super wealthy anymore. So that's my closest point. So, and their argument is, well, you write all this off, we're going to come after you.
Yeah.
Well, how? In fact, we're better off using this money than your money, but nobody knows that. But that's a huge part of income inequality. They have absolutely siphoned off an enormous amount of wealth, and again, our debt is their asset. We write off our debt, their asset disappears. And all that money's gone offshore, poof. And they know it. We just don't.
Yeah.
But
They
anyway.
know it already.
But I do want to say one more thing, because there's another side of this. The Koch brothers, our dear friends, the Koch brothers, are trying to get a constitutional convention. They claim they'll restrain themselves to just one issue, and that's to have a balanced budget amendment. They are not that far from it. If that happens, not only can't you do MMT, but at that point, the government has no way to pay its debts. Right now, it's not a problem. At that point, it becomes a huge problem, and the only way to pay it off is to privatize. It's basically what Greece is going to be like. And that means you're going to remain in austerity, and they're going to privatize everything, including the fossil fuels that are in the ground. So you're going to see fossil fuels burn, native rights are gone, education's not going. I mean, they're just basically, if you look at the debt burden they have, if they've created with this fake money they've run up, there's more claims on wealth than there's actual wealth. Like if you had to liquidate all the schools, all the education, all the pensions, you still can't get enough to pay off the debts these guys claim they owe.
Wow.
And if they can get a balanced budget amendment, and the government can't do the some of the stuff we're talking about, it's like Greece, and they're going to come after this. So on the one hand, I would argue we want to be really working hard to block that, and use the opportunity to explain to people there's actually a whole different place we can go after that. So, but they're going together. So I'm just saying people should be aware of that.
Well,
And of course, if they
there's
get
something very important that's beyond that. Like you said, they claim that it's about a balanced budget amendment.
right.
If they call a constitutional convention, there are no
Do whatever they
rules.
want.
It all goes away.
I hate to say it, but in a way, I almost hope they do what they used to and put everything in the world in it. So, because a balanced budget sounds appealing to people. They don't understand these issues, right?
Yeah, they look at the
But if they
road
start
budget.
putting in everything else they want, they might scare some people. So that almost might, but if the balanced budget goes through, democracy is done, climate change is done, and health, it's done, right? You are going to become
Yeah.
like Greece. So that's a serious thing. But so I think the education has to have two things. One, to avoid that catastrophe and get people to realize how much of a better future there is for us if we go this way. Anyway.
Wow.
Any other questions?
That's mind-blowing.
Comments? Anything?
Okay, I'll ask the other half of my question, which is, if those are the people who are speaking against these ideas, who besides these people are speaking effectively for these ideas presently? I mean, are there people that are within either of the mainstream political parties that are doing anything of value to move things in that direction? You mentioned Bernie, but are there others?
Well, Bernie knew about it, and Bernie had all the people Bernie had Kelton, Hudson, Bill Black. You want to pick the all-stars of this. The absolute superstars. That was his entire team. He never said a word about it. And I agree we need to tax the rich. I totally do. But when asked about how we can pay for free education, he said we should have like a transaction tax. I'm all for that. but it's still, we could have got there another way. And the point is, he's not going to talk about it until there's space to talk about it. So that needs,
Yeah.
but right now, Democratic Party between, let's face it, Wall Street is trying to pull it back, and some people are trying to pull it away. If you want to know who's who, this is the issue. Because if you're trying to move away from austerity and not dealing with climate change and all that, there's no way to dealing with these issues that doesn't go through MMT. So the more we make it visible, and the more we can ask people where they are, the more space there is to build something. But it's just beginning. So I know I talked about this when I was in Occupy, and I was treated like a crazy person. And then suddenly Bernie's got some of these people, and there's an institute in the Midwest that's doing this, and there's a lot of stuff online that you call MMT nerds, which is true, which is, I guess, whatever. And it's starting to happen a little bit. And if we're talking to the city council, we're talking to here, we're talking to labor. If we can just start get a little percolation going, and people start getting what's going on, and the Nation article helps. But if you want to talk about who's the cutting edge of this, if you sign up and you get involved, it's going to be you. I mean, it was just at the starting point right now. But if we're talking to church groups and religious groups and labor groups and school groups, and remember, this is win-win for everybody, except for Wall Street, whatever. But this is where it started, and people are doing this actually probably more in Seattle than anyplace else right now. Which is why I'm hoping if we get our city council resolution through, we can tell the rest of the country to, get on.
Yeah, I want to say that some of us went to talk to Michael Bryan, so he's a Seattle City Councilman. And we went to talk to him about this, and he had never heard of it, and he was pretty blown away because it's the opposite of everything he'd been told. And he's a really smart person and very, engaged, but he didn't know anything about it. And now I don't know what's going to happen, but now he's heard about it. He can't unhear it. And we're going to try to hook him up on Skype with some of the, the really big guns in this field. Now we can go to Del Bene, we can go to the senators. Some of them may know about this, but don't want to talk about it, don't want to say it, because that's against everything that most people think. So if you go to them, what I'm feeling is that we have to give them cover.
Yeah.
If they don't know about it, we're going to tell them about it. And once they do know about it, we're saying, okay, you have cover now. You can talk about this. You can talk about this on the floor of the Senate. Because we have to get this out. And it's up to us. Politicians they're not going to do it themselves.
Well, what we need is a counter think tank. We need takers, we need names, we need propaganda. We need pro-us propaganda.
That think tank is there in the University of Missouri in Kansas City. Is that right?
Really?
Yeah.
They have
Yeah.
And
a
where you
whole
going?
contingent.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go to Bard College at the Levy Institute, which is an economics research institute on the East Coast. And they do a lot of stuff like that. And EPI, Economic Policy Institute, they're kind of on board in that way. I think the issue in terms of that is we're outgunned financially.
Oh,
So we
yeah.
have research
Yeah, we
institutes
do.
that actually do research, not research institutes that do marketing, like all these other ones do. So they spend a lot of money on getting their information out there, and stuff like MMT is more focused on actually doing research. So that's part of the problem. So if ordinary people can access some of that research and spread it around, we actually fight those narratives in the public, it'll help. I mean, to the politician question, there is no one, like Randy said, so we really have to generate it out there.
Now, Vandana absolutely rocked it when she met with O'Brien. She was just an absolute rock star. She always is. But before we go to the senators and the congressmen, we need to have more than us. So we need to be going to schools, church. We need to be doing the grassroots. And there is some really good presentations here. And if you want different stuff or more information, you can ask us. We need to learn this stuff. We need to teach people to be able to do presentations, and we need to just spread the word around so that it's building. But so basically, if we want to save the world, this is a way, I think, to do it. And it's simply a matter of we get educated, we go to our neighborhoods, we go to our churches, our schools, and we start getting people realizing. And the big thing about MMT is it's called theory. This is how the system works. This is how we go to war. This is how we finance the bailouts. And we could actually bail out our world with the same stuff. So if we know it and we start getting people to know it and build the groundswell, it goes somewhere. And if we get our city council a few things to do it, there's a lot of people doing this around the country that I think will start going out and doing the more practical stuff like this. We may have a movement on our hands. This is how it's going to start. But I mean, what you did was awesome, but I think before I go to the senators, we need to go to these kind of groups, churches, schools, whatever, and I think it can make all the difference. Because who here wouldn't want this to happen if we could do this, right? I mean, who wouldn't want these things?
Well, one way it could spread would be through Indivisible. Indivisible is all across the country, so.
Right, well, that's, grassroots is your marketing, okay? Co-brothers are spending the money, but if you've got the think tanks, which we know, we need connections to the think tanks. Okay, we need connections to their papers, and then grassroots publish this stuff.
There's an MFT think tank that's specifically there to be accessible to the public. That's what they're there for, public education. That's
Right, but you have to know it's there, you have to connect people to it.
what we're trying to do.
We need to educate ourselves.
Yes.
Yes.
You can't just take a set of talking points.
Yes.
If you don't understand the logic behind it and how the system works.
Right.
In order to be able to respond to any kind of question you get.
I mean,
would,
trainings would be helpful.
Excuse me?
Trainings would be.
Oh, yeah, you bet. Well, I have a PhD, but I never did an economics class through being a professional graduate student. You have to somehow dig into this stuff.
Yeah, and part of the problem with this subject, I guess, is that it's really thick in jargon and it can get really technical.
Sure.
So some of the simple questions will have multiple answers depending on what you mean by that question. If you want a quick introduction, at the very bottom is a blog, New Economic Perspectives. It's Bob Black and some others, Randall Ray, they put this blog together specifically for putting out MMT information about it. You can read blog posts, they're usually pretty short. There's also a thing called the MMT Primer. It's Randall Ray's book that he wrote. You can get them all in blog post form at this website, or you can buy a physical copy if you want. It reads like a textbook, but I say that to mean it doesn't read like an academic paper that's really complicated, but it is boring. It'll take you step by step.
Right.
I would say that the Angry Birds, Stephanie Kelton's Angry Birds is a bit long, but it's very well explained. And then there's an article here in Counterpunch from Alan Mastro that I think explains it very, very well. And that's like a 6-7 pager. And then it's all on here.
If you want the in-depth and you want to know the gears, go to the primers, or just read the videos if you want, or watch the videos.
But between Stephanie Kelton and Alan Nasser's paper, and whatever trains you want to do, you guys are going to know enough. I mean, I give these talks, and I get questions at times that are like, oh, shit, you know, and that's when you learn. I mean, you're never going to be prepared until you get the questions, you do the best you can, and then you learn them for next time. And that's
You say, I'll get back to you.
right, and that's what you do. But you know what? You have to learn as you do it, and get better. And you also learn how to make the talks better based on the questions you're getting, but you know what you did right or wrong. But this can go somewhere, and I think it's starting to happen a little bit.
Yeah, it's become more popular. And I guess
The Nation's article made a big difference.
Yeah, it did.
To
Actually.
me.
And it tells you that it was happening for them to report it on.
Which article?
it's on here.
It's all in there.
Actually, I don't have that sheet, but I'll take it if you've got
Is this
more.
So I have
got
one
here
here.
extra.
Robert Reich, where's Robert Reich on this?
Because he's visible.
So Robert, I don't think Robert Reich is bad, but he's more of a, what I'm going to call a neo-Keynesian, so more like a Krugmanite. It's not that they disagree with some of the basic tenets that we talked about here. They have more reservations about how much we can expend the extra money into the economy.
Okay.
So if you want to look into those disagreements and critiques, go ahead. I highly encourage that.
No,
Thomas Pally has some.
My interest is because he has such wide viewership, and
Yes.
because he does stuff with inequality, media where they do in-depth stuff. I mean, I wonder if it really wouldn't be worth, getting in touch with him and really do, I would imagine he might be somebody who'd be willing to take this
Kind of
on.
talked about that before.
Yeah, I mean, Krugman, no. Reich never commented. Reich was involved in the Bernie campaign. He obviously knows about it. I will go back to what I said before, though, that I think for a lot of people to feel brave, as their leaders, we have to make them be brave and feel it safe. Just like gay marriage. Until they know that we're supported, they're not going to take the stand.
Yeah.
And I put Robert Reich in that column. And he actually is, if you look at Angry Birds, Stephanie Kelton does single him out as somebody, along with Krugman, who's just not getting us. But I think a lot of people are moving on this. And I think he probably is better, but I think for people to talk about it, they have to feel, you look at the support we're getting from the Muslim community right now, it's pretty awesome. But 20 years ago, you wouldn't have seen that.
Right.
And you're seeing support for gay marriage, you wouldn't have seen 20 years ago. We have to make it safe for brave leaders to be leaders. So we have to be willing to do the work first. I really believe that.
And to be fair, Robert Reich, he specialized in labor economics, so he didn't do financial macroeconomics. So there is a possibility that he could be pushed in that direction. It's just not his specialization. So.
I see a lot of people actually take more conservative positions and have been moving, like Stiglitz has moved quite a bit. I mean, I'm not going to have, I mean, the reality is, this isn't working. And I think people are becoming more aware of that fact, actually, they're moving. But again, I think we need to move them, and we can. But Alan Nasser's article is great, and Stephanie Kelton Angry Birds is great, and please sign up, because we definitely want to work with everybody's interested.
Thank you so much.
Hey, how's it?